President Helen Burke stood before the communication array that would broadcast her message across the galaxy and chose words that would define humanity's place among the stars. She spoke directly to Fleet Commander Vex Kalar, who waited in his damaged flagship above his conquered home world. Her voice carried the authority of a species that had proven they could destroy their enemies, but had decided to offer something no Zephyrian had expected from creatures they had dismissed as primitive mammals. The offer shocked every alien who heard it because humans proposed terms that no victorious species in galactic history had ever suggested. They wanted territorial boundaries that would prevent future conflicts, reparations for the murdered civilians of New Kansas, and complete disclosure of Zephyrian military capabilities. But they also offered trade agreements, shared technology, and cultural exchange programs that could benefit both species if the aliens chose cooperation over continued hostility. Vex Kalar listened to the human terms with confusion that bordered on disbelief, because victory in galactic warfare had always meant complete domination of the defeated enemy. The mammals were offering survival to a species that had tried to exterminate them. He had spent centuries conquering other races and had never encountered victors who showed mercy to those who had shown them none. The response from the fleet commander revealed the tragic irony that had driven the entire conflict. The Zephyrian Empire had attacked humanity not from strength, but from desperation as their biotechnology failed and their species faced slow extinction. They needed fresh genetic material and new worlds to save themselves from the consequences of centuries of genetic manipulation. What humans had seen as conquest had actually been the death throes of a dying civilization. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the joint research station that was established in neutral space to begin the process of understanding between former enemies. He worked alongside the same aliens who had tried to kill him 2 years earlier, and discovered that Zephyrians were not the monsters he had imagined, but beings trapped by their own biology and history. Dr. Amy Walsh collaborated with alien scientists to develop solutions to the genetic crisis that had driven them to war. The work was not easy because many humans refused to forgive enemies who had murdered millions of civilians. Protests raged on Earth and the colonies as survivors of alien attacks demanded justice through complete destruction of the Zephyrian Empire. Colonel Tony Rogers led veteran groups that considered any mercy toward the aliens to be betrayal of the humans who had died fighting them. Some human factions refused to honor the peace treaty and continued fighting as independent militias. They used captured alien technology to conduct raids against Zephyrian civilian targets, arguing that the only way to ensure human security was through the complete elimination of potential threats. President Burke faced opposition within her own government from leaders who believed she had thrown away total victory for meaningless moral satisfaction. The controversy deepened when Dr. Rachel Stone published her analysis, showing that Zephyrians were genetically related to humans through common ancestors that had spread life throughout the galaxy millions of years earlier. The enemies humans had fought were distant cousins who had chosen genetic manipulation over natural evolution. The war had been a conflict between two branches of the same family. General Claire Morgan supported the peace process despite her earlier advocacy for total victory because intelligence reports showed that other alien species were watching the conflict's resolution. How humans treated their defeated enemies would determine whether future contact with unknown species would begin with diplomacy or warfare. Showing mercy to the Zephyrians would establish humanity's reputation as a species that preferred cooperation to conquest. The practical work of building peace proved more difficult than winning the war had been. Captain Maria Santos led teams that were reverse engineering Zephyrian biotechnology, while teaching aliens how to use human manufacturing techniques. The two species had developed completely different approaches to technology that made collaboration challenging but potentially rewarding for both sides. Admiral Kate Phillips oversaw the establishment of joint patrol fleets that would prevent conflicts between human and Zephyrian territories. Former enemies worked together to hunt down the independent militias from both species that continued fighting. Despite official peace treaties, Phillips discovered that Zephyrian military discipline and human tactical flexibility created combinations that were more effective than either approach alone. The breakthrough came when human medical technology proved capable of stabilizing Zephyrian genetic structure. Dr. Stone worked with alien biologists to develop treatments that could halt the genetic degradation that had been killing their species for generations. Humans had saved their enemies not through conquest, but through the same scientific innovation that had made them dangerous opponents. 5 years after first contact, Ambassador Lisa Hayes presided over the signing of the Terran-Zephyrian Accords on a neutral world that had been jointly terraformed using combined human and alien technology. The former navigator of the New Horizon had become the first human diplomat to an alien species. She watched as enemies who had tried to exterminate each other became partners in building something neither could have achieved alone. The ceremony was attended by representatives from 17 other species who had been contacted by human exploration fleets. The galaxy was full of intelligent life that had been avoiding contact with each other out of fear. Humans and Zephyrians working together had created the first multi-species alliance in galactic history and opened possibilities that neither had imagined when the war began. Fleet Commander Vex Kalar served as the senior Zephyrian ambassador and often worked directly with President Burke on issues that affected both species. He had learned to think beyond the military solutions that had defined his earlier life, and discovered that former enemies could become allies if they chose to build trust instead of walls between their peoples. The first interspecies school was established on a world that had been devastated during the war and rebuilt through joint human-Zephyrian effort. Children from both species learned together and developed friendships that their parents could never have imagined. They represented the future of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. President Burke often visited the school and watched human and Zephyrian children playing games that combined elements from both cultures. She remembered the decision she had made to offer mercy instead of demanding total victory, and knew that history would judge whether she had been wise or foolish. But she was satisfied that humanity had proven they were strong enough to spare defeated enemies who had shown them no mercy. The question that defined the peace came from Vex Kalar during a private meeting with Burke. He asked why humanity had chosen to offer terms to enemies who had committed atrocities against human civilians. Her answer became the foundation of human diplomatic doctrine for the next century. She told him that humans had proven they could give the Zephyrians the ending they had chosen when they attacked humanity, but they had decided to give them the ending humans chose instead. The final scene of the conflict that had shaped galactic history took place in the memorial garden built on the site where New Kansas had stood. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to honor the victims of the war, while committing to prevent future conflicts through cooperation and understanding. The dead had not died in vain if their sacrifice led to a galaxy where different species could work together. Burke stood beside Vex Kalar as they dedicated the memorial and reflected on how the war had changed. Both their species, humans had discovered, they possessed the capacity for total destruction, but had chosen to use their strength for creation instead. Zephyrians had learned that true strength lay not in conquest, but in the wisdom to accept help from those they had tried to destroy. The epilogue written by historians decades later described the human-Zephyrian War as the conflict that ended the age of species isolation and began the era of galactic cooperation. Humanity's greatest victory had not been the defeat of their enemies, but the decision to transform those enemies into allies. They had proven that mercy required more courage than cruelty, and that the strongest species were those who knew when not to use their full power. The legacy of the war lived on in the galactic alliance that grew from the original human-Zephyrian partnership. Dozens of species that had never trusted each other enough for peaceful contact learned to work together on projects that benefited everyone. The galaxy became a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, because one species had chosen to build bridges instead of walls. Captain Morrison, now an elderly man, often told young cadets at the Galactic Academy that the most important lesson from the war was that enemies were just friends you had not learned to understand yet. The species that had seemed most alien and hostile had become humanity's closest partners because someone had been brave enough to offer trust instead of demanding submission. The story that began with Jake Morrison's peaceful research mission and nearly ended with galactic genocide had become a legend about the power of choosing mercy over vengeance. Admiral Kate Phillips commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled as it approached the Zephyrian home system. Her ships were smaller than the alien biovessels, but they moved with precision that came from 2 years of learning to think like their enemies. Every captain in the fleet had fought Zephyrians and survived to develop tactics that turned human disadvantages into strengths. They were no longer the peaceful explorers who had first encountered alien aggression, but warriors shaped by conflict into something their enemies could not understand. The Battle of Zephyr Prime began with a deception that would have been impossible for species that valued honor over victory. Phillips ordered her fleet to broadcast surrender signals while positioning ships for a coordinated attack. The Zephyrian defenders moved to accept the human capitulation and found themselves surrounded by vessels that opened fire with weapons that violated every treaty humans had ever signed about warfare. Nuclear devices designed to crack planets apart were used as tactical weapons against individual ships. Commander Pete Jackson led a squadron of ships that existed only as electronic signals until the moment they attacked. Human technology had advanced to the point where entire fleets could be disguised as sensor ghosts until they chose to become real. Jackson's vessels materialized inside Zephyrian defensive formations and began destroying bioships from within, using weapons that turned their own biotechnology against them. Captain Maria Santos flew ships that had been grown rather than built, using captured alien technology, modified with human improvements. Her biovessels responded to her thoughts with inhuman speed, while retaining the human capacity for tactical thinking that emphasized results over honor. Santos led her hybrid fleet through battles that lasted minutes, but left entire Zephyrian squadrons destroyed. She had become something between human and alien that was more dangerous than either. The Zephyrian defenders fought with desperate courage, but they were facing enemies who had studied their tactics for 2 years and developed countermeasures for every strategy in the alien playbook. Human ships would retreat from positions they could hold and attack targets they could not capture. They used gravitational weapons that turned stars into tactical assets and deployed viruses that turned bioships into weapons against their own. Sidvex Kalar commanded the defense of his homeworld from a flagship that had been grown in the sacred breeding pools and enhanced with the finest biotechnology the Empire possessed. He watched human ships tear through formations that should have been impregnable and realized that he was fighting an enemy that had learned to treat war as a science rather than an art. The mammals had no concept of honorable combat and no respect for the traditions that made warfare meaningful. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian home fleet. Human forces surrounded the planet and began broadcasting terms that were not negotiations, but statements of fact. Zephyr Prime would surrender or be sterilized from orbit using weapons that would leave nothing alive on the surface. Vex Kalar faced the choice between personal honor and the survival of his species, and discovered that honor meant nothing when everyone who valued it was dead. Dr. Rachel Stone watched the orbital bombardment of Zephyrian biocities from her research ship and felt sick at the effectiveness of her weapons. The viruses she had created to target alien biotechnology were working too well, turning living cities into rotting masses that consumed themselves in desperate attempts to survive. She had wanted to save humanity, but had created instruments of genocide that made her question whether the species they saved was worth preserving. President Helen Burke received reports from the battlefronts showing that human forces were winning everywhere they engaged the enemy. Admiral Phillips had taken the Zephyrian home system, while other fleets were advancing through the Empire's territory with minimal resistance. The alien forces that had seemed invincible 2 years earlier were collapsing under pressure from enemies they had dismissed as primitive mammals who knew nothing about real warfare. The intelligence reports from captured Zephyrian facilities revealed the true scope of human victory. The alien empire had been built on biotechnology that was failing after centuries of genetic manipulation. Their species was dying slowly and had hoped to save themselves by acquiring fresh genetic material from conquered races. The attack on humanity had been a desperate attempt to find new sources of biological diversity before their civilization collapsed. Completely, General Claire Morgan presented President Burke with operational plans for the complete occupation of Zephyrian space. Human fleets could control every major alien world within 6 months and ensure that no hostile force would ever threaten human colonies again. The cost would be the systematic destruction of alien biotechnology that would leave millions of creatures dying slow deaths as their modified biology failed without maintenance. The debate in the Global Defense Council revealed divisions that had been hidden during the desperate early months of the war. Some leaders argued that humanity should show mercy to a defeated enemy, while others insisted that the aliens who had murdered millions of humans deserved no consideration. Burke listened to both sides and realized that the decision would define what kind of species humanity would become. Admiral Foster supported complete victory because he believed that any mercy shown to the Zephyrians would be interpreted as weakness by other alien species. Humans had proven they could fight and win against superior technology, but they needed to establish their reputation as a species that would respond to aggression with total destruction. The galaxy was full of potential enemies who would test human resolve if they showed any sign of weakness. Dr. Stone opposed the plan because her analysis of Zephyrian biology showed that their empire would collapse within decades, even without human intervention. Committing genocide against an entire species would make humans into the monsters they were fighting. There had to be a way to ensure human security without destroying every alien who had opposed them. Colonel Tony Rogers reported from the occupied worlds that many Zephyrians were not warriors but civilians who had been forced to support the war effort through genetic manipulation and social conditioning. His soldiers were finding alien families hiding in ruins and children who had been modified to serve as living weapons but retained enough original personality to feel fear and pain. Captain Jake Morrison sent messages from his ship in Zephyrian space describing encounters with alien refugees fleeing their homeworlds. These were not the proud warriors who had attacked human colonies, but desperate beings whose biotechnology was failing, and who faced slow death as their modified biology broke down without the support systems their empire had provided. The reports from human forces throughout alien territory painted a picture that complicated the simple narrative of good versus evil. The Zephyrian Empire had been built on conquest and genetic manipulation, but it had also been the only thing keeping dozens of modified species alive. Destroying the empire would result in the deaths of billions of beings who had never chosen to be enemies of humanity. President Burke faced the hardest decision of her life as she stood in the war room, surrounded by displays showing human fleets positioned to end the Zephyrian Empire forever. She had the power to guarantee human security for generations by destroying every potential threat. But she also had the power to choose a path that would preserve something essential about humanity that she feared they might lose in victory. The final intelligence report came from Captain Santos, whose bioships had infiltrated the deepest levels of Zephyrian society. She had discovered that the alien empire was not a unified military force but a collection of conquered species, held together by fear and genetic manipulation. Many of the beings humans were fighting had been enslaved by the same forces that had ordered the attack on human space. General Morgan presented the tactical situation with clinical precision. Human forces controlled all major Zephyrian industrial centers and could complete the destruction of alien biotechnology within weeks. The enemy had no reserves and no ability to continue the war. Victory was complete, and the only question was how thoroughly they wanted to destroy the defeated empire. Admiral Phillips reported from Zephyr Prime that alien leaders were requesting permission to surrender formally. They were offering to provide all information about their biotechnology and military capabilities in exchange for the survival of their civilian populations. The proud warriors who had attacked humanity were now begging for mercy. They had not shown to human colonies. Dr. Stone completed her analysis of captured Zephyrian genetic records and discovered something that changed her perspective on the entire conflict. The alien species that had seemed so different from humans shared common ancestors. Life in the galaxy had developed along similar paths, and the creatures humans were fighting were distant cousins who had chosen genetic manipulation over natural evolution. President Burke realized that the choice she made would echo through galactic history for millennia. Humans could become the dominant military power through genocide and ensure their security through fear. Or they could prove that a species could be strong enough to show mercy to defeated enemies. Fleet Commander Vex Kalar watched from his flagship as the human deadline passed without surrender, and felt satisfied that the soft mammals had chosen the path of destruction. His bioships moved into human space like a living wave of death, each vessel grown in the breeding pools of the Zephyrian homeworld, and equipped with weapons that had conquered 40 star systems. The first target was the colony world of Haven, where 50,000 humans lived in cities that would burn beautifully. Under Zephyrian fire, Vex Kalar had studied human military tactics and found them primitive and predictable. They would gather their forces to defend their strongest positions and die heroically while accomplishing nothing. The attack on Haven began exactly as the fleet commander expected, with human ships rising to meet the invasion force in open battle. The colonial defense fleet was small and equipped with outdated weapons that barely scratched the living hulls of the Zephyrian vessels. Vex Kalar deployed his war beasts, creatures bred for combat that could adapt to enemy tactics within hours of exposure. The human pilots fought bravely, but their ships exploded one by one under the superior firepower of the biofleet. Within 6 hours, the orbital defenses were destroyed, and the invasion of Haven could begin in earnest. General Claire Morgan watched the battle from Earth Command and saw something that Vex Kalar missed in his certainty of victory. The human ships were fighting in patterns that made no sense for a defensive action. They were drawing the alien fleet into specific positions while appearing to retreat in panic. She realized that Colonel Tony Rogers on Haven was not trying to win the space battle, but was buying time for something else. Her analysis of Zephyrian tactics showed they always applied overwhelming force to the strongest enemy positions. They had no experience fighting an enemy that refused to defend what appeared to be most important. Colonel Rogers had evacuated the civilian population from Haven's major cities 3 days before the attack and filled the empty buildings with surprises for the Zephyrian ground forces. When the alien war beasts landed, they found cities that looked inhabited, but contained only automated systems designed to look like human activity. The real human forces were hidden in the wilderness and underground installations, where they could observe the alien tactics without being detected. Rogers had studied every piece of data from Jake Morrison's encounter, and noticed that the aliens seemed uncomfortable when their enemies did not behave according to expected patterns. The first real engagement happened when a Zephyrian patrol encountered what they thought was a fleeing group of human soldiers. The war beasts pursued the humans into a narrow canyon, where the chase should have ended quickly. Instead, the canyon exploded in a carefully planned ambush that killed half the alien patrol. Before they understood what was happening, Rogers had used mining charges and industrial equipment to create weapons that the Zephyrians had never seen. Before, their bioarmor was designed to resist energy weapons and projectiles, but had no defense against collapsing rock and chemical explosions. Vex Kalar received reports of the ambush with growing confusion because his war beasts should have been able to adapt to human tactics within hours. Instead, they seemed to be encountering new surprises every time they engaged the enemy. Human soldiers would appear from impossible locations, attack with weapons that made no sense, and disappear before the aliens could respond. The fleet commander had conquered species across the galaxy, but he had never fought an enemy that treated war like a game with constantly changing rules. Dr. Rachel Stone worked in her laboratory on Earth with samples of Zephyrian technology recovered from the Haven battle. She was a xenobiology expert who had spent her career studying theoretical alien life forms. Now she had actual specimens to examine, and what she found excited and terrified her in equal measure. The Zephyrian bioships and war beasts were living creatures modified for combat, but they retained biological vulnerabilities that their creators had never considered. They were designed to fight honorable enemies who used similar technology, not creatures like humans who would use any available weapon to win. The breakthrough came when Stone discovered that Zephyrian biotechnology had no resistance to Earth diseases, viruses, bacteria, and toxins that had evolved alongside humans for millions of years. The alien creatures had immune systems designed for their homeworld and the sterile environment of space. They had never encountered the biological chaos of a world where life forms competed violently for survival. Stone realized that humans possessed weapons the Zephyrians could not even comprehend. Every breath of Earth air contained microscopic killers that could destroy alien biology. General Morgan approved Stone's proposal to begin biological warfare against the invaders, even though it violated every treaty humans had signed about the conduct of war. The Zephyrians had started the conflict and shown no interest in limiting their own violence. Human survival was more important than human morality, and the time for civilized behavior had passed. Stone began developing weapons based on modified Earth pathogens while Morgan coordinated with Rogers to test them against the alien forces on Haven. The first biological attack was subtle. Rogers contaminated the water supply in one of the abandoned cities with bacteria harmless to humans, but deadly to Zephyrian biology. When alien forces occupied the area, their war beasts began dying of infections that their medical technology could not identify or treat. Vex Kalar ordered his forces to retreat from the contaminated zone, but similar problems began appearing wherever humans had been present. The mammals were using their own world as a weapon in ways that violated every concept of honorable warfare. Reports from other battlefronts showed that humans were adapting to Zephyrian tactics faster than the aliens could develop countermeasures. On the mining world of New Dakota, human forces had converted industrial equipment into weapons that could damage bioship hulls. On the agricultural world of Green Valley, colonists were using farming chemicals to create toxic environments that killed alien war beasts. Everywhere the Zephyrians landed, they found enemies who fought with tools and techniques that made no logical sense. Captain Maria Santos led a group of engineers who had captured a damaged Zephyrian scout ship and were attempting to reverse engineer its technology. They discovered that the bioship was more machine than animal, but operated on principles completely foreign to human science. The vessel could repair itself, adapt its weapon systems, and even reproduce given enough time and resources. Santos realized that one captured alien ship could provide humans with technology decades ahead of their current capabilities if they could learn to control it. The attempt to pilot the captured bioship nearly killed Santos and her team because the alien control systems were designed to interface with Zephyrian nervous systems. Human brains could not directly connect to the living ship without being damaged. She solved the problem by using human-computer interfaces to translate between human thoughts and alien biology. It was crude and dangerous, but it worked well enough to prove that humans could learn to use Zephyrian technology against its creators. Vex Kalar faced a situation he had never encountered in centuries of warfare. The humans were not just resisting his invasion, but were learning from each engagement and developing new tactics faster than his forces could adapt. His war beasts were designed to evolve countermeasures to enemy weapons, but they could not evolve fast enough to keep up with human innovation. Worse, the mammals seemed to enjoy the challenge of fighting an enemy they could not defeat through conventional means. The fleet commander requested reinforcements from the Zephyrian High Command and received a response that shook his confidence in the inevitable victory. 17 other invasion fleets were reporting similar problems with human resistance. Species that should have surrendered after the first demonstration of Zephyrian power were instead becoming more dangerous with each passing day. The High Command wanted to know how a primitive species that had never fought an interstellar war could be causing problems for the greatest military force in the galaxy. Reports from intelligence operatives revealed that humans were not just fighting the Zephyrian invasion, but were treating it as an opportunity to test and develop new military technologies. Their scientists were working around the clock to analyze captured alien equipment, while their engineers were building new weapons based on what they learned. Their soldiers were sharing tactical information across vast distances using communication systems that the Zephyrians had been unable to intercept or decode. General Morgan received updates from Colonel Rogers, showing that human forces on Haven had not only stopped retreating, but were beginning to advance against alien positions. The biological weapons were proving effective against Zephyrian war beasts, while human soldiers used captured alien equipment to even the technological disadvantage. Rogers reported that his troops were no longer fighting to survive but were actively hunting alien patrols using tactics that terrified the enemy forces. The war that was supposed to last 3 months had entered its 6th month with no clear end in sight. Vex Kalar found himself commanding an invasion force that was being slowly ground down by an enemy that refused to follow any predictable pattern of behavior. Captain Jake Morrison looked out at the dark space through the bridge windows of the New Horizon and felt good about the mission. They had been surveying the outer edge of human space for 3 months now and found 2 new worlds that could support human life. The crew was tired but happy to be doing important work for the colonies that needed new places to grow. Navigator Lisa Hayes called out the coordinates for their next jump, while Chief Engineer Sam Carter ran diagnostics on the faster than light drive. Dr. Amy Walsh was in her lab studying rock samples from the last planet they visited. It was routine work, but Jake loved being out here on the frontier where humans were still discovering new things about the galaxy they lived in. The alarm system broke the peaceful mood with its harsh red warning. Lisa's hands moved fast over her control panel. As she tried to understand what the sensors were detecting, 3 large objects had appeared from nowhere and were moving toward them at high speed. Jake ordered battle stations even though the New Horizon was just a research ship with basic shields and no real weapons. The objects were unlike anything in the human database of known ships. They looked like they were grown instead of built, with smooth curves and what appeared to be living tissue covering metal frameworks. Sam reported that the unknown ships were charging some kind of energy weapons, and Jake made the decision to try talking to them. He opened all communication channels and broadcast in every human language plus the mathematical formulas that scientists said any intelligent species would understand. The response came not in words but in a beam of pure energy that barely missed the New Horizon's main hull. Jake ordered evasive action, but the alien ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything humans had ever built. Lisa managed to avoid 2 more shots while Sam pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. Amy ran onto the bridge with her recording equipment because she wanted to document first contact with an alien species, even if they were trying to kill the humans. The alien ships surrounded the New Horizon like hunters circling wounded prey. Their weapons fired in patterns that showed they were not trying to destroy the human ship but disable it. Jake realized they wanted to capture his crew alive, and the thought made his blood run cold. He had read reports about what some human groups did to prisoners during the old wars on Earth, and wondered what aliens might do to captured humans. Sam shouted that the engines were failing, and they had maybe 10 minutes before the ship would be dead in space. Lisa found a small asteroid field nearby and suggested they try to hide among the rocks while they figured out what to do next. The alien ships followed them into the asteroid field but seemed more cautious now. Jake watched as they used some kind of tractor beam to move large rocks out of their path. Instead of destroying them, Amy pointed out that this showed the aliens had technology far beyond what humans possessed, but also suggested they might have rules about unnecessary destruction. The New Horizon found a hiding spot behind a large asteroid and shut down all non-essential systems to avoid detection. Jake gathered his crew in the bridge, and they watched the alien ships search for them with growing fear. One of the alien vessels came close enough that they could see details of its construction. The ship appeared to be breathing and had what looked like eyes along its hull. Amy whispered that it might be a living creature modified for space travel rather than a traditional machine. Lisa detected energy patterns that suggested the ship was scanning the asteroids one by one looking for the hidden human vessel. Sam worked quietly to repair the engines while trying not to make any noise that might give away their position. Jake made the hardest decision of his career and ordered them to make a run for human space while they still had power. The chase that followed lasted 6 hours and covered 3 star systems. The alien ships were faster, but the New Horizon had one advantage that Jake used well. Human ships were built to be unpredictable because humans had spent centuries fighting wars against other humans who thought the same way they did. Jake ordered random course changes and emergency stops that confused the alien pursuit. Sam managed to get more power from the damaged engines by bypassing safety systems that could have killed them all. Lisa plotted a course through a dangerous nebula that the aliens seemed reluctant to enter. Amy recorded everything she could about the alien ships, including their weapon signatures and energy patterns. They reached the edge of human space with the alien ships still following but staying back as if they were afraid to enter human territory. Jake sent an emergency message to Earth Command describing the encounter, while the aliens maintained their distance. After 2 days of waiting, the alien ship suddenly accelerated away from human space and disappeared into the deep void. Jake ordered course for Earth at maximum speed because he knew the information they carried was more important than his ship or crew. The first contact with an alien species had been an attack, and that changed everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, and Jake spent every day writing his report about the encounter. He tried to be accurate about what he had seen while also conveying the threat these aliens represented to human civilization. Amy analyzed her recordings and found evidence that the alien ships were not just advanced, but represented a completely different approach to technology based on biological engineering. Lisa calculated that the aliens had technology at least 50 years ahead of anything humans possessed. Sam worked on repairs and wondered how human ships could ever fight against enemies who could grow their weapons instead of building them. When they reached Earth orbit, Jake was surprised to find military ships waiting for them instead of the usual research vessels. Admiral Nick Foster came aboard the New Horizon personally to debrief the crew and review all their data. He listened to Jake's report with a serious expression that grew darker as the captain described the alien weapons and their apparent desire to capture humans alive. Amy showed her recordings to a team of scientists who became very quiet when they saw how the alien ships moved and functioned. Lisa shared her navigation data with military analysts, who immediately began calculating how long it would take the aliens to reach major human colonies. President Helen Burke called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council, and Jake found himself standing before the most powerful people in human space. He told his story again while the leaders asked hard questions about alien capabilities and intentions. Admiral Foster presented analysis that suggested the aliens were scouts for a larger force, and that humanity should prepare for a full invasion. The president asked Jake for his personal opinion about whether the aliens could be reasoned with, and he had to tell her that they had opened fire without any attempt at communication. The debate that followed lasted 3 days, and Jake stayed on Earth to answer questions from military planners and scientists. He learned that other ships had reported strange sightings on the frontier, and that his encounter was probably not the first contact with these aliens. Amy worked with xenobiology teams to develop theories about the alien technology, while Lisa helped military navigators understand the alien ship movements. Sam shared his engineering data with shipbuilders who immediately began designing new human vessels based on what they had learned from the encounter. On the 4th day, the aliens made the decision for everyone when long-range sensors detected a massive fleet approaching human space. The ships were identical to the ones that had attacked the New Horizon, but there were hundreds of them moving in perfect formation toward the nearest human colony. Jake watched from Earth Command as the alien fleet stopped just outside human territory and began broadcasting a message in perfect human languages. The voice that spoke was cold and mechanical, but the words were clear enough that everyone could understand the threat humanity now faced. The alien commander called himself Fleet, Commander Vex Kalar, and he spoke to humanity like a teacher addressing stupid children. He said that humans were soft creatures who had never known real war and that resistance would only make their suffering worse. He gave humanity 72 hours to surrender all their worlds and ships or face complete destruction. Jake listened to the ultimatum and felt something change in the room around him. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something else that he recognized from history books about the old wars on Earth. President Burke stood up slowly and looked around the room at all the military leaders and scientists and politicians who were supposed to keep humanity safe. She asked Admiral Foster how long it would take to mobilize every ship and soldier in human space, and he told her they could have a response ready in 48 hours. She asked the scientists how quickly they could adapt human weapons to fight alien technology, and they said they were already working on it. She asked Jake if he thought the aliens were expecting humans to fight back, and he smiled for the first time since the encounter, and told her that the aliens had no idea what they had just awakened. The attack on New Kansas came without warning, as Vex Kalar decided to show humanity what happened to species that refused to surrender quickly. His bioships surrounded the agricultural world and began systematically destroying every settlement. While broadcasting the carnage across human communication networks, 2 million civilians died in the space of 6 hours, while Zephyrian war beasts hunted down anyone who tried to escape. The fleet commander wanted humans to understand that resistance only brought greater suffering to their innocent populations. President Helen Burke watched the live feeds from New Kansas and felt something break inside her chest. She had spent her career trying to build a peaceful human civilization that would never repeat the mistakes of Earth's violent past. Now she was watching families burn because an alien species wanted to prove their superiority through mass murder. The images of children running from creatures bred for killing filled her with a rage that surprised her with its intensity and clarity. The emergency session of the Global Defense Council lasted 30 minutes and ended with a unanimous vote that changed the nature of the war completely. Burke stood before the cameras that would broadcast her message to every human world and spoke in a voice that carried the cold promise of absolute retribution. She told humanity that the time for defensive warfare had ended, and that they would now show the Zephyrians what humans did when they stopped trying to be civilized. Admiral Nick Foster received authorization to deploy weapons that had been locked away since the end of the last World War on Earth. Human military technology had advanced far beyond what they used in their colonies, because scientists had never stopped preparing for conflicts that they hoped would never come. The safeguards and limitations built into every human system were designed to prevent accidents and maintain moral standards. Now those restrictions were being removed by direct order of the President. Commander Pete Jackson led the first human fleet to operate under the new rules of engagement and discovered that his ships had capabilities he had never suspected. The power systems that normally operated at 30% capacity could be pushed to levels that would have been considered suicidal under peacetime regulations. Weapons that were designed to disable enemy vessels could be modified to cause complete molecular destruction. Navigation systems that prevented ships from traveling through dangerous regions could be overridden to use black holes and stellar phenomena as tactical weapons. The Battle of Kepler Station became the first demonstration of human warfare without moral constraints. Jackson's fleet engaged a Zephyrian force twice their size using tactics that would have horrified human commanders just weeks earlier. Human ships accelerated to near light speed and used kinetic weapons that turned small asteroids into planet killers. They deployed nuclear mines that created temporary gravitational anomalies and tore alien bioships apart at the molecular level. Captain Maria Santos commanded a squadron of ships that had been infected with captured Zephyrian biotechnology and modified with human improvements. Her vessels looked like alien craft but responded to human tactical thinking in ways that confused and terrified the enemy. When Zephyrian forces tried to use their bioships' natural advantages, they found themselves fighting creatures that combined alien capabilities with human ruthlessness. The modified bioships could adapt to enemy tactics like their original versions, but they adapted in ways that reflected human strategic thinking rather than Zephyrian honor codes. When attacked, they did not respond with measured force designed to prove superiority, but with overwhelming violence designed to eliminate threats permanently. Santos watched her hybrid vessels tear through a Zephyrian patrol and realized that humans had created something that combined the best aspects of both technologies. Dr. Rachel Stone's biological weapons proved even more effective than predicted when deployed against Zephyrian forces throughout human space. The modified viruses spread through alien bioships like wildfire, turning living vessels into rotting hulks that could no longer support their crews. War beasts that had seemed invincible began dying of diseases that attacked their modified biology in ways their creators had never anticipated. Stone had weaponized 4 billion years of Earth's evolutionary warfare. Vex Kalar received reports of the human counterattack with growing horror as he realized that the mammals had been holding back their true capabilities from the beginning of the war. Human ships that had seemed primitive were revealing hidden weapon systems that could destroy bioships with single shots. Human soldiers were deploying chemical and biological weapons that killed war beasts in ways that violated every concept of honorable combat. The enemy was fighting like they intended to exterminate every Zephyrian in the galaxy. The fleet commander tried to retreat his forces to defensive positions but discovered that human fleets were already moving to intercept them, using faster than light travel capabilities that exceeded anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. The humans had built their ships to be unpredictable because they expected to fight enemies who thought like they did. Now they were using that unpredictability to devastating effect against aliens who could not adapt fast enough to counter human innovation. Colonel Tony Rogers led ground forces on Haven that had transformed from desperate defenders into aggressive hunters. His soldiers used captured alien technology enhanced with human modifications to track down Zephyrian patrols. They had learned to think like their enemies while retaining the human ability to use any available resource as a weapon. Rogers watched. His troops coordinate attacks with a precision that impressed even him, as they systematically destroyed every alien position on the planet. General Claire Morgan received intelligence reports showing that human forces across 17 different battlefronts were not just winning, but were advancing toward Zephyrian territory with clear intent to carry the war to the enemy home worlds. The aliens who had expected a quick conquest were now facing the possibility of having their own planets invaded by the species they had dismissed as primitive mammals. The strategic situation had reversed completely in less than 2 months. Zephyrian High Command sent emergency reinforcements to Vex Kalar, but the additional bioships only provided more targets for human weapons that grew more sophisticated with each engagement. Human engineers were reverse engineering alien technology faster than the Zephyrians could develop countermeasures. Worse, humans were improving on the original designs in ways that the aliens could not understand or predict. Captain Jake Morrison returned to active duty commanding a new class of human warship, that incorporated lessons learned from 6 months of fighting Zephyrians. His vessel combined traditional human engineering with captured alien biotechnology to create something that was more dangerous than either technology alone. Morrison had gone from peaceful explorer to hunter of aliens in less than a year and found that he was good at the job. The turning point came when human forces captured an intact Zephyrian command ship, along with its senior officers. The interrogation of alien prisoners revealed information that shocked human intelligence analysts. The Zephyrian Empire was not the unified military force it appeared to be, but was actually a collection of conquered species held together by fear and genetic manipulation. Many of the so-called Zephyrian war beasts were actually modified creatures from worlds that had been absorbed into the Empire. Dr. Stone analyzed genetic samples from captured aliens and discovered that the Zephyrians themselves were a dying race, whose biotechnology was failing after centuries of genetic manipulation. They had attacked humanity not from strength but from desperation as their own biology began to break down. The empire that seemed so powerful was actually collapsing from internal problems that they hoped to solve by acquiring fresh genetic material from conquered species. President Burke received Stone's report and realized that the war could end in complete human victory if they continued their current strategy. Human weapons were proving superior to alien defenses, while human tactics were overwhelming enemy forces that could not adapt fast enough to survive. The path to total victory was clear, and the military leaders were eager to follow it to its conclusion. The debate in the Global Defense Council was fierce as some members argued that humanity should show mercy to an enemy that was already defeated, while others demanded complete destruction of the alien threat. Burke listened to both sides and realized that the decision she made would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. They could become conquerors who ruled through fear, or they could prove that strength and mercy were not mutually exclusive. Admiral Foster presented the final operational plan that would end the Zephyrian Empire permanently. Human fleets would advance to every alien world and systematically destroy all biotechnology, while leaving the basic infrastructure intact. It would be genocide on a scale that would make humans the most feared species in the galaxy, but it would also guarantee that no alien race would ever threaten them again. General Morgan supported the plan because she believed that showing mercy to aliens who had murdered millions of humans would encourage other species to test human resolve.